Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving away my whole lecture. All right, we can all go home now. All right. So it's a pleasure to be back. I haven't been on the campus for almost 2 years now. I have taught a course here in the past that I will give you a little insight into. But yeah, it's really nice to be invited back. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's certainly my pleasure to be here. A little bit about myself. I've been in China for almost 5 years now. When I first came, I started working with choirs and orchestras and got connected with Shanghai Symphony Orchestra, was a Shanghai Symphony Orchestra teaching artist, and taught at Shanghai Orchestra Academy, where I taught a similar course to what we're going to discuss today. So since then, I have really learned a lot about what students need in China, and there seems to be an issue, and I think it's universal. I don't think it applies just to students in China. I think it applies to students all over the world, and that's music is abstract, something that we hear and then it goes away. It takes effort and it takes knowledge to be able to put words to sound, and it doesn't matter what language we're speaking. That connection between sound and descriptive terminology is difficult. So over the past 5 years specifically, I've kind of developed a method that I have partially borrowed from the art world in the way that we describe works of art and the way that we apply that to those same concepts to listening to music. Now, I'd like to start with an inspirational idea here. Some of us may have seen this before. It's I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Now, it says it's a Chinese proverb, and I have asked many of my Chinese colleagues and friends, and none of them know where this came from. So I did a little research, and I tried to find out that most people think it came from Confucius, but that is not true. All right? People attribute things to Confucius because he said a lot of things. But in this case, he did not say this. Now, the one person I did find in Chinese history that said something like this was, now if I say it wrong, I'm sorry, 荀子. Close enough, close enough. And he said something like this. Now, I'm not going to say this in Chinese because it's a little difficult. Now, the translation, if I remember right, not hearing is not as good as hearing. Hearing is not as good as seeing. Seeing is not as good as knowledge. Knowledge is not as good as action. And true learning is achieved by action. Something like that, right? Yeah. And that's the closest most scholars think that this idea came from. And so the ideas that I'm going to share with you today are something that if you just listen to today, you most likely will forget. But if you take some effort and you write it down, or you maybe record it and then listen to it again later, then there's a better chance that you will remember it. But if you take this concept and these ideas and you apply them to your studies, to your music making, to your classes, to your everyday communication about music, then there's a better chance you will understand. So I call this the practice. We have to practice in the practice room to prepare whatever pieces we're working on. We have to practice our brain to understand how we describe sound. All right? Now, I'm hoping that this can be very interactive. So if you have questions, don't be afraid. Raise your hand or shout out, right? I'm happy to stop, and it'll be much more fun and interesting if we talk together. All right? So I think it's important we're going to start with a little music. I always like to begin and end all of my classes with music, and we're going to listen to it. Let's start with some music. So I'm going to play a short example. It's only like 1 minute and 45 seconds. It's a very famous song. If you know the song, then try and not shout it out to let others kind of process the sound. Now, I want you to think of how you describe this music in 5 words or less. All right? So counts as 1 word. All right? So try and think of 5 words or less that describe this music. Tips. If you don't know the English terms, think of it first in Chinese, and then we all have smartphones. Don't be afraid to translate it. 5 words or less challenges us to find the words that best fit with the music. If you have 100 words, then eventually you'll say something that works with the sound. But if you only have 5 words, it's much more challenging to describe the music correctly. So let's listen. So, who wants to go first? Don't all shout at once. I can't, it's a little too loud. So, 5 words or less. Anybody? Anybody want to give it a try? Yeah? I think maybe. Okay. Blue, sad. Okay, that's 2. Not too bad. If you can do it in 1 word, I'll be really impressed. But it's very possible. Yeah? What's that?
Melancholy.
Did you say melodic or?
Melancholy.
Melancholy. Okay, I'm impressed. All right, what else? Yes?
Nostalgic.
Nostalgic. Okay. German. Correct. Comfortable.
Rising and falling.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Now we're getting to some descriptive terms. What else? You want another one?
Depressive.
Depressing. Yeah, okay, depressing. Yes. What else?
Graceful.
Graceful. Okay. Beautiful.
Melodic.
Melodic. Okay. Say it again.
Lyric.
Lyric. Okay, lyrical. Yeah, lyrical. Very nice. Yeah.
Peaceful.
Peaceful. Good. Yeah.
Romantic and enchanted.
Romantic and enchanted, or enchanting. Anybody else? So, it's very good. So, some very excellent words. Now, I'll give you my 5 words, all right? I got to do them again. Winding, meandering and unresolving, longing. 5 words, right? And I picked those words on purpose because they each describe a different part of the music. Winding describes the melody. It makes this winding motion. Meandering and unresolved. What do you think that applies to in the music?
The accompaniment.
The what?
The piano part.
The piano part, the accompaniment, the harmony. Meandering and unresolved applies to the harmony. Now, how many perfect authentic cadences did you hear in that piece? Anybody keeping track? No? There's only 2. There's only 2. Is the piece in major or minor? Are you sure? There's only two perfect authentic cadences, and they're major cadences. Say it again. What were you going to say?
E minor.
No, it's not E minor. No. So it's A major or F sharp minor, right? And the piece intentionally goes between the two. But we actually never have a cadence in F sharp minor. We actually never have an F sharp minor chord in the entire piece. So it's interesting that you would say that the piece is minor. We do have an A major cadence. We have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. So a stronger argument is that it's a major piece, but that's the point. The point is that we don't know. That's why it's meandering. Meandering is, I think I'm going to walk this way. Oh, I changed my mind. Now I'm going to walk this way. I want to be in F sharp minor. Oh, now I want to be in A major, right? And A major only happens on the word may. That's important if you ever study this piece. This piece is called In the Month of May, the Wonderful Month of May. It's a Schumann art song that was written right around the time he proposed to Clara Schumann. So little love connection there. From his song cycle Dichterlieder, right? A very famous song cycle. So the last word is my word that describes everything. If I had to summarize this entire music in one word, I would say longing. Because that pull between major and minor, that meandering feeling, gives me a sense of a happy memory that is removed from me. So I use the word longing to describe how the music makes me feel. Now, winding describes the actual motion of the melody. Meandering and unresolved describes the actual function and meaning of the harmony. Longing describes my personal feeling. I would say most of your answers fell in this category, where we described how the music made us feel. Now, that's very nice, but if you are the singer for this poem and you say to the pianist, "Can you make it sound more longing, please? Can it sound more blue?" Right? Someone said blue, right? It's a great word that describes how we feel, but when we're trying to share our musical ideas with someone else, it doesn't work very well. So the method that I'm going to share with you tonight is something that I've developed that helps us take the steps to get from here to here. And so I hope that that's something I can share with you. Now, when we talk about listening to music, we have two terms. We have active listening and we have passive listening. Can anybody tell me the difference between these two things? What's that?
When we listen to some noise outside.
Okay, so when we hear noise, it's certainly passive. It's just something that's going on. What else? That's one possible explanation, but there are many. Yes?
I suppose active listening means you know the music quite well, you interpret it,
Okay,
think about it.
all right.
Just get into your ear and it just pass away. It's more like a passive listening.
Do you think it's possible to actively listen to something you've never heard before?
Definitely, I think.
So, very good. You can tell you've been in my class before. All right. What else? So, passive, we do this all the time. Anybody like to listen to music while they work out? Anybody like to listen to music while they're maybe cooking or maybe while they're doing homework? Maybe for us, we don't like to listen to music while we do homework. But for many people out there that aren't musicians, listening to music is a daily occurrence in life, and almost everybody is passively listening to music. When you passively listen to music, you hear, but you don't try to understand it. The purpose is just to listen, to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we want to approach music in an analytical way, in a descriptive way, we have to use active listening. And active listening is when we listen so we can try to understand the music. It's the difference between focusing on what's going on as opposed to just letting it go in one side and out the other, as we say sometimes. So active listening is very important in how we turn our mind, how we approach any music that we want to study or that we want to approach. And it's difficult for me to not do this because I've practiced this for so long that anytime I hear a classical piece come on, I'm always, oh, I know this chord just happened, and this happened, and I always hear all the things, and it makes me not want to go to sleep. Like a lot of people say, oh, classical music's so sleepy. No, it's not. Right? So today we're going to really talk about how to actively listen to music. Now, I have a 3-step process, and this is what we borrow from the art world, but we can connect it uniquely with music. It's describe, ask yourself, what do I hear? Analyze, ask yourself, what do I think? And 3, interpret, what do I feel? Now, the correct order is to do it this way. But most of us do it this way. We tend to listen to music and share how it makes us feel before we analyze it, before we try to describe it. This is not the way to actively listen to music. When you jump right to the interpretation, then you have feelings with no facts. You have ideas with no basis. You need to have evidence to explain why you feel a certain way. It's a much better argument to say, I want the music to sound longing because I want you to bring out these unresolved cadences that Schumann is creating. That 4/5 cadence in the beginning, really stretch it out. Then they're going to know, okay, that's how I make that longing sound. So what I'd like to do is, basically I'm going to give you many more words than you can remember in one class. And the point is that we have to open our mind to what's possible. So don't try to leave this lecture memorizing every single word that I'm going to share with you today. Instead, try and change the way that you think about listening. Change the way you think about describing the music, and you'll have more success. Now, it's helpful if you break it down into music's 5 categories. Oh, wait, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. Often we jump right away to the flute sounds like a bird, or the brass section represents war, right? Instead, it's better to follow this model, describe, analyze, interpret. Describe is the most fundamental level. I call this the facts. What do I hear? So I have an adage that I use in my classes. It's KISS, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. All right? Too often we make things way more complicated than they have to be. We're trying to describe why Schumann, what he was feeling in that exact moment, and so he did this and this and this. Say, no, he just wrote a melody that went up. Right? That's the facts. No one can argue with you that that melody is going up and then down and then up and then it's holding. So that's the facts. What do I hear? Now, is it going up, down, loud, soft, bright, mellow, short, long? Again, there's going to be lots of words in this section. Don't expect to have you remember them all. Analyze, we take what we heard, the facts, and we're taking it to the next level. We're trying to put these words together and make some sense out of them. What do I think? So I know that the music goes up and down and then holds, so why is that important? Why do I think Schumann might be using that? What kind of musical devices, compositional techniques can create this kind of idea? What's the form? What's the function? Is this functioning as a 4-chord? Is it functioning as a 1-chord? Now, for those of you that are new to the conservatory, you might not have a strong theory or history background yet, and that's perfectly okay. But applying the idea of listening to the basics and then trying to make some sense out of them, you will learn in time how to apply specific theory or history terms to it. But this process is the first step. And then last, the opinions. What do I feel? Everyone can feel something different. And so it's important that you say, well, I feel this way because, and then you can describe what kind of cadence it is. What kind of secondary dominant. How is this melody transitioning over the harmony. And you know that it's doing that because of what you heard, the facts. So this is the process. The music represents love. The oboe tells a story of a lost loved one. So now you can explain, why is it blue? Right? It's blue because of this, this, and this, and this. So it's how we be more descriptive. Anytime you have an answer, think, is this an interpretation or is this a description? And then if you say, nope, this is an interpretation, start over. Go back to the beginning, describe first, and build on top of it. Any questions so far? My teacher used to always say, count to 10, and someone will raise their hand at 9. My teacher was wrong. All right, so the way that we can break this down is we break this down to the elements of music. Now, people have different theories on what the elements are. Some people say there's like 17 or 7 or 9. Really, there's 5 basic elements. Now, anyone who's had my class before can't share the answers, all right? What are they? What are the basic elements of music? Rhythm. So pitch is a smaller category within melody, harmony, form. Form's kind of its own little side thing, but it's definitely an important element. Dynamic is part of another word we haven't said yet. Timbre, also known as color, right? And the last one is texture. So we have melody, rhythm, harmony, color or timbre, texture, and form. Now I usually include form with texture because it describes the overall texture over the piece, but it can also be its own little category. But these are the main things. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through and give you a bank, right? Kind of a vocabulary of how you can describe, analyze, interpret the elements of music. It's going to be way more words than you can remember. I don't think I can say that enough. But don't get frustrated and instead think, how can I apply starting specific? The biggest issue I've found is that we listen to music and there's so much information. There's so many things going on that we don't know where to start. So instead, we just give up and we switch from active to passive. If we can identify one thing that we want to listen to first, that's going to help us hear what we want to hear. Instead of trying to pull out all of these things at the same time, you can instead find one thing, focus on it, and pull it out of the music, and then build on that. All right? Any questions? So things like dynamics is going to be all part of texture. Tempo is going to be part of rhythm. Pitch is part of melody, right? So everything is connected. So we're going to start with melody, right? So melody, one of the 3, we say melody, harmony, and rhythm are the 3 basic elements. If you don't have melody, you don't have music, or you don't have harmony. That's debatable, right? We can have long debates about what is music and what's not. That's for another lecture, all right? So today we're going to be talking about how we can describe melody in different ways. So if we look at an example, one that I always use in my class, is always best to start with the classical period, right? Because classical music is very easy to describe and understand, and then you kind of branch out from there because things get a little more difficult. So we all know this one. Right? So we have a nice melody here. How could we describe that? How can we describe that melody? We've all heard it, and if we play piano, we played it when we were 7 or 8, right? If we were good. Now remember, keep it simple. KISS, keep it simple. The first thing to do how can we describe that? Okay, that's too complex. We're analyzing, right? It goes up. That's it. It goes up by what kind of interval?
Broken tonic triad.
Yes, too complex. All right, 2/3. Even simpler. It's a skip. 2 skips. 2 skips, right? Now what? How can we describe the next part? Down. But not just any kind of down. A leap, a big down, right? So we had skips going up, big down, all right? Then, no. It's called an upper neighbor, all right? If we're talking about our theory terms. Upper neighbor, right? This is in the chord. This is not on the chord. Upper neighbor. Lower neighbor, right? So, right? Neighbor next door, up. Upper neighbor, down, lower neighbor, right? So, 2 skips going up, 1 leap down, and then basically back to where we started with a little extra jump, right? That's how we can keep it simple. That's our describe. What do you hear? Long, short, high, low, wide, narrow, fast, slow, stepwise. What's stepwise? Right? You think about going up steps, right? Each note in the scale is stepwise. Stepwise up, stepwise down. All connected in the scale, right? Stepwise, skipping, chromatic, leaping, right? We had a leap down. Angular, horizontal, vertical. Now, these are a little more advanced, but angular, this applies to a lot of melody. This melody is not angular. It makes this kind of fluid shape, an up and a down, right? But there's lots of melodies that go, right? It makes a different shape. If I were to draw on the board, I'd have down, up, right? As opposed to this fluid line. So of course, it applies very much. Horizontal is what? This way. Vertical, this way, right? So a lot of times we use this, for example, to describe something like Debussy. Debussy's melodies are very horizontal. They don't have a lot of shape. They just go. The technical term is called planing, right? They plane. The term's plane across the harmony. Now, analyze. What do you think? Now we can go up the next step. Now we go up the next step. So, now we can say this is a C major triad. Yes? Then what? Dominant. Back to tonic. So we have a 1, 5, 1. Now we can go up to the next level. Is it major, minor? Now, melody can be tonal or atonal. Now, this A is very important. There's a lot of musical terms that have one and then the other with an A in front of it. Now, depending on how pretentious you are, you could say atonal, or you can say atonal, all right? What does it mean when we put the letter A in front of a word?
The opposite.
The opposite, right? If it's tonal, then we're going to have some kind of scale or some kind of harmony. But if it's atonal, then we're going to, right? We lose that sense of what the tonality is. So I began an and on C, so maybe I did make it tonal. But now we can talk about bel canto style. This is something from the Romantic period that we use to describe a particular type of singing. But we can use these kind of words to describe what we're hearing. We know that the technique that the singer is using is called bel canto style. And I believe the singing department is called the bel canto singing department, right? Is that right? We have different styles of singing teachers, and some of them are called bel canto singers. It's a style. It's the way we apply it. Does it modulate? Are we changing keys? How are the phrases composed? So now we can take the notes that we hear and we can put them into groups. So we can say that there's different phrases. Right? Is that the end of the melody? No, but it's the end of the first part of the idea. So this is the first half of the phrase. And then we can say there's the end of the phrase. Or I can say there's the antecedent and the consequent. Or I can say here's the first half of the phrase, here's a comma, here's a period, right? We can describe the shape of the melody using lots of different terms. These are all analyses. All right, any questions so far? All right, interpret, what do you feel?
Sorry, Professor.
Yeah,
Would you please go a little bit further with the scanner?
with the scalar. So scalar means anything that goes with a scale. So the same thing happens because you have this is scalar. I'm just playing different scales. Now I'm at a D major scale. Right? So that's what I mean by scalar. You're showing passages of scales, moving scales. All right? Anything else? Good question? You're testing my piano abilities today. All right? So now we can describe. How can we describe that Mozart? Now we get to talk about our feelings. Finally, yes. Now we can finally share how it makes us feel. So what do you think? How can we describe that Mozart opening? Lovely, simple, melodic. So melodic is one of those terms that applies to a whole bunch of things. So it's hard to apply to something specific. So it's a good word, but so many melodies are melodic. All right? What's that? Lively. I'm going to pick on you because you've been in my class. All right? So lively is typically something that's faster paced, right? More energetic. I wouldn't argue that the opening phrase is lively. I would say, dun, da, 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 da. That's more lively. So you have to be specific on what you're trying to describe. Anything else?
Elegant.
Elegant. Yes.
Bright.
Bright. Yes. C major is very bright. Innocent. Ooh. So that's an interesting term. That's a hard one to give the proof, right? What makes a melody innocent, right? It's a little harder. It's doable, absolutely, but it's a little difficult, right? Now, the key terms we usually use for classical melodies is tuneful, right? Catchy, something that makes us want to sing it when we go home. And there's a reason, because Mozart wanted people to come to his concerts again. So he'd make, right, I guess not make more money, but he'd have more people talking about his music. So if you could sing it when you go home, then you'll remember it better. That's why we usually do the exposition twice, right? I want you to hear my melody 2 times, all right? Any questions? It doesn't always have to be positive. Sometimes it can be boring. Sometimes it can be clunky, right? It's like a wheel that has a bigger side on one side. Da, 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 dee, da, da, right? That's clunky. All right, any questions about how we can describe melody? Again, more words than we probably all know or understand. But the point is to get us to open up our thinking. Open up our thinking. Any other questions? Now, I hope you guys can ask lots more questions because, right, we got to fill some time here. Okay? So, let's move on. Now, rhythm. Rhythm. So, again, rhythm is one of the 3 main elements, gives pulse and movement to the music. Rhythm is a little harder to describe sometimes. There's very simple examples, but then there's also some very complex examples when we start talking about does experimental music have rhythm? Does some things have rhythm? You know, it's getting to a little gray area because sometimes pulse and movement doesn't so much exist. So we have to find ways to describe it. Now, symmetrical, asymmetrical. There's that magical A again. What's symmetrical and asymmetrical? Regular. I'm gonna put this over here, right? Now, it's not a perfect circle, but is it symmetrical or asymmetrical? I'm trying my best here, all right? Okay, here we go. Okay, there we go. Are you happy now? Symmetrical or asymmetrical? Okay, the best example of symmetrical is our face, right? Our faces are designed to be symmetrical. If you draw a line down the middle, you have one eye on this side, one nostril on this side, right? Everything on this side, one ear. You draw a line on the other side, you have the equal same thing. If you cut it through the middle, it's equal on both sides. That's symmetrical. So when rhythm is symmetrical, that means that we can find a middle ground. We can find a way to divide it, and there's equal sides on both halves. So anytime we talk about duple meter, 1, 2, 1, 2, or triple meter, right? Now, triple meter still is considered symmetrical, right? Because you can have 1, 2, 3, draw your line, 1, 2, 3, right? You have 3 and 3 on each side. Then we have, of course, quadruple, 4, 4, and everything else is just derivatives of that. So asymmetrical is what? When we add the A to something, we make it the opposite. So if something is asymmetrical, now this one's very easy to draw. Right? I draw a line down the middle. Is it the same on both sides? No. So rhythm that's asymmetrical isn't balanced. It's not the same on both sides. All right? So we can discuss rhythm in a lot of different ways. Here's a few examples. So what do I hear? Is it fast, slow, duple, triple? Now again, we have to train our ears to be able to hear where's the strong beat. Because duple is strong, weak. Triple is strong, weak, weak. Quadruple, strong, weak. A little less strong than the original strong, weak, right? And so you have to train your ears to be able to hear what is my separation of the beat here. And that's how we can describe the basics. Is it complex or simple? Or sometimes we say compound and simple. What's the difference between those two? Right? So simple is when we have two smaller subdivisions per one beat. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. Compound is when we have 3 subdivisions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right? That's compound meter. Still quadruple, but instead of having 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, I have 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Right? Da 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 da. Is that simple or complex? It's complex. Because I go, take me out to the ball game. If you were American, you'd all be singing with me right now. All right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now there's also an argument where you could say 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I guess it's always going to be compound. Some songs, depending on how fast or slow you do it, changes that feeling. Because if you only feel the 4, then you're not going to have that 3 subdivisions. But if you go very slow, the subdivisions become more obvious. So that comes into our feeling on how fast or slow. Why your teacher might say, I think you need to take this section faster, is because they want to feel a certain subdivision of the beat. Steady, strong, hammered. What's a hammer? Yeah, hammered. You ever hear any rhythm that's this? I'm sure you have. One of my favorites to play. Right? Hammered. Now, is that symmetrical or asymmetrical? So raise your hand if you think it's asymmetrical. Raise your hand if you think it's symmetrical. So I'll play it one more time. I'll play it again. Okay, so listen for symmetrical or asymmetrical. Symmetrical or asymmetrical? You're all wrong. It's symmetrical. Now, it's symmetrical. Now, here's how we really would describe it. Symmetrical with irregular accents. Irregular meaning accents that don't happen where you think that they should. So instead of accenting on the beginning of the measure, we change how we accent the beat. That doesn't change if it's symmetrical or asymmetrical. Now later, that piece, very asymmetrical, all right? But in this particular section, it's not. It's very symmetrical. It's very steady. It's very strong. It's very driving, right? Because once he starts, he doesn't stop. And then later he goes dum bum 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 bum. Still the beat stays the same, right? So be careful. Asymmetrical doesn't exactly mean that something is not, right? Just because it sounds off doesn't mean that we're changing the beat. An example of asymmetrical is going to be mixed meter. Anytime you have mixed meter, anytime you have 7, 8, right? Then you're going to have 2, 2, 3, right? You can have strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's not symmetrical because we can only divide it. It's going to be lopsided. Or you can have 5, 8, right? Where you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, right? Or 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. There's only 2 versions of that, and they're not equal. Because we can't. Now, some music theorists would argue that you could cut this beat in half. Right? But that gets a little too expensive for my taste. All right? Any questions about this so far? So how can we analyze this? How does rhythm support and affect the other elements? Now we're taking the basics and we're moving it to the next level. We're trying to describe how this rhythm is maybe supporting the harmony, right? Because in this particular example, he's using this particular chord, right? An F flat major chord and an E flat 7 chord, right? He writes it as F flat instead of an E major. That's Stravinsky for you. You put them together. So he has this harmony. Now he could have wrote the whole piece, right? It has this nice feeling, but when you add the rhythm, it creates a new layer, right? And just because he wanted that primal feeling, right, in the dance, in the ballet. So everything has a reason, but you have to find it, and you have to find the right way to break it down. Does it change? Rhythms can change. Rhythms can modulate. Rhythms can be additive or subtractive. You can go faster. You can go slower. These are all part of how we can describe rhythm. The downbeat. This one's really important. What's the downbeat? The strong beat, right? Whatever meter we're in, the downbeat is always the first one. Whenever we go to 1, it's always the one the conductor does down, right? This is called the upbeat, and this is called the downbeat, right? So a lot of conductors will say, let's start at the upbeat before measure whatever. And then you can say, okay, that means I need to come in on the last beat before 1. That's going to help us know where we are. A lot of music, it's hard to hear the downbeat, right? It's hard to hear the downbeat. I'll give you another quick example. Another piece is one of my favorites. So where's the downbeat? Right? So, da, dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da dee da da. It's very hard to find the downbeat. Is it clear? No, right? And for Debussy, that's what he wants. He wants that feeling. So when I taught this class at the conservatory, I tried to show how these words apply to certain styles and how they apply to certain composers. So that when you hear something, you say, I know that technique. I know that that's an unclear downbeat. It's most likely such and such and such. I know it's going to be one of these 2 or 3 composers. Or I know it's going to be from the classical period because it's a catchy, tuneful melody. It helps you narrow down your listening. And when it comes to exams, that's very helpful. All right? Now, last one, interpret. What do you feel? How does the rhythm make you feel? Exciting? Dum, bum, 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 bum. You know, that really makes your heart beat fast. Is it boring? Sometimes the rhythm's too slow, right? And it makes the piece boring. We're not interested. We lose that interest because the rhythm is too slow. Is it too fast or too slow? Is it energetic? A lot of Bach's music we call very energetic because the rhythm keeps the music going forward, right? We have a term for that, Fortspannung, forward spinning. A lot of times you'll have a melody in Bach, da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee dum dee da dee da dee da da dee da dee da 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 dee da da dee da dee da da dee da da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da da. That's Bach's fugue in G minor, right? It starts simple, but then the rhythm unfurls, and it spins forward, and it gets more and more intense. So we actually have a term for that, Fortspannung. Any questions? Fort, F-O-R-T-S-P-U-N-N-U-N-G, Spannung, Fortspannung, spinning. Any questions? It's German, yes? So, as a musician, you have to know many languages, all right? Not just English. Most of the time it's in Italian, right? And if you're studying Bach or you're studying Debussy, you need to know German and French, right? So, anytime I have a student and we're studying a piece and they have not defined all of the French or all of the German or all of the English, they have to go home and come back when they're ready, right? If you don't know what it means on the score, then how can you perform it? So it's very important, and I've had a lot of Chinese students who do not do that, so don't make the same mistake. Make sure that you define all of the terms on the music, because they all are important. Any questions? All right. Now, harmony. So, harmony, it's easy for us to analyze, because that's what we learn to do. But describing it, remember, we have to keep it simple. We have to keep it simple. So, harmony gives the music function, supports the melody. It can be tonal or tonal, atonal, right? So, how can we make, what's the difference between tonal and atonal or atonal? Okay, so you could say that, tonal music or major minor is tonal, whereas 12-tone system is not part of the tonal system, so it's atonal. But there's also another way you can describe it. Usually when we say tonal, it means that there is a center, a home, a tonic, right? And so we say that there is a central pitch in the Mozart piece. We always go back to this C. Even though we go away from it, we still come back. This is our tonal center. We call it the tonal center. Sometimes we can modulate and go to another key, so we have a temporary tonal center somewhere else. But that's the goal of most classical music. We go home, away from home, and then we come back. Tonal center. When we take away that center, when we don't have a central pitch that we go back to, it becomes atonal. Now, Schoenberg, writing in the 12-tone system, all 12 pitches are equal, so of course it's atonal. But is there other atonal music? Any music that doesn't have a center, a tonal home, is considered atonal. So Alban Berg, is not writing exclusively in the 12-tone system, but his music is still considered very atonal because he doesn't have a specific place that he always goes back to. There's no center. Everything's always moving and shifting and shaping. Now be careful as well. You can have atonal sections. I do a lot of composition as well, and if I want a section that's really going to throw off the listener, I'll put some atonality in there. But then I go back, because atonality is not my favorite. So it's all about how you listen to it. Sometimes it's tonal, sometimes it's not. So harmony can be discussed in many different ways. So describe. What do you hear? Fast, slow. Again, you'll find some of these terms apply to more than one category. We can use fast to describe rhythm, melody, and also harmony. Horizontal. Does it plane? We talked about Debussy before. Is it vertical? Does the harmony give us this real feeling of verticality? Always try to picture the music in your head. What shape is it making? That's going to help you define it. And when we get to our listening, there will be some examples of how you can visualize music to describe it. Dissonant, consonant, open, closed, chromatic, rich, static, dense. Now, some of the ones worth exploring, consonant and dissonant. Consonant is what?
Stimulating many overtones.
Okay, yes. So we're talking about the overtones. If the overtones agree with one another, then generally we consider it consonant. But our version of consonant and dissonant has changed over time, right? In our current system, we consider thirds consonant, fifths consonant, sixths consonant, octaves consonant, fourths. Basically, these are the consonant intervals. And then when we get to seconds, dissonant, sevenths, dissonant, tritones, dissonant, very dissonant, right? But that's different than what people felt in the medieval period, right? The medieval period, thirds were very dissonant. They only liked fifths and octaves. So the way that we analyze consonant and dissonant depends on your perspective. The way that medieval and Renaissance musicians viewed consonant and dissonant is different than how we view it today. They also had different tuning systems. If you listen to their music in their time period, it would sound different to us because of how they tuned it. Equal temperament, how we tune pianos, has really only been around for about 100, 150 years. All right? Any questions about this? Open and closed generally means if it's within an octave or above an octave, right? Closed harmony is your typical block chords, right? Where open harmony, I spread the notes out, right? So I have more than an octave. I have an open harmony. Open harmony is much more rich. It has a much bigger sound. Now chromatic we know. Rich, static. Have you ever heard a piece that's only based on one chord? Yes, there's some. Anybody like Philip Glass? Anybody know Philip Glass? Yeah? He'll play the same chord for 10 minutes. Ravel, anybody like Ravel? He has a piece that's one chord for basically 17 minutes, and then the last minute he changes it. You know what piece that is? Bolero. Bolero is the same chord the entire time. It's very static, but it's very rich. And when we talk about texture, we can talk about why. Now we can describe how the harmony fits. We can analyze it. Is the harmony functional? How can we understand the cadence structure? Do we have imitative harmony? If we're talking about medieval or Renaissance music. Do we have a counter melody? Tonic, dominant, ostinato. What's an ostinato?
Figuration.
Okay, a figuration that does what? Repeats over and over again, right? We have a lot of music that has a small melodic or harmonic or rhythmic idea that repeats over and over again. We can have a harmonic ostinato. Dum, 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 dum. And then it happens, what, 48 times? Something like that? Canon in D. Any questions about this? Now, we go to the next level. Oh, now real quick before I move on. Functional. Functional is an important term because we use functional to describe harmony that has purpose. Some harmony can be functional. Sometimes it can be non-functional. Right? This is considered functional, right? Because it has a purpose. Our tonic chord always goes to a predominant. So here we can say that the predominant is using as a passing neighbor chord function, so it's not really progressing the harmony. If you want to get super technical, then we go to 5, dominant, 5, 7, 1. So this has a function because tonic chords move to predominant chords move to dominant chords. Dominant chords move back to our tonal center, right? And that's why we take music theory, and it takes 2 years to describe that 1-4-5-1, right? It takes a long time to learn that. But if you ever take a Schenker class, Schenkerian analysis, you'll soon learn that all music is 1-5-1, right? And that's the point of music. That's functional, all right? Now, we take away that function, we take away that 5-1, and it becomes now non-functional harmony. Non-functional harmony. Harmony that just exists. Right? I don't have a tonal center. I'm not trying to go anywhere in specific. I'm just playing all of the notes in C major, right? We call this planing, as I talked about with Debussy. All right? Does that make sense? Everybody got? Now, of course, we have terms for all of the scale tones. We don't need to go into too much detail. Save that for your music theory class. Now, interpret. How? Now, this is the big one. Harmony is what causes a lot of our emotions. We have a lot of these feelings from the way the harmony is written. How does the composer use these chords to elicit certain emotions out of us? Because Schumann never went 5-1 in the key of F sharp minor, we never got that feeling of a resolution in F sharp minor. We did get a resolution in A major, but of course that conflicts with our feeling of F sharp minor. So this is what's creating these emotions, our feelings. So again, we started by describing, then analyzing, and then interpreting. All right? So now we've gone through the 3, melody, harmony, rhythm. These are the ones that take time. It takes time to develop this kind of word bank, this kind of vocabulary, and it's not going to happen in 1 year. It's not going to happen in 4 years or 6 or 10. You're always learning, always building new vocabulary. You kind of have a set kind of usage, but then I'm always finding new ways to describe music. So you want that basic understanding, and that's what you learn. That's the goal of your undergraduate degree, is to kind of learn that basic knowledge. But then as you start expanding that, you start to really find out all the different things. I always say that after I finished my undergrad, I felt like I knew a lot. Then I finished my master's, and I said, okay, maybe I don't know so much. Then I finished my doctorate, and I said, I know nothing, right? Because you start to realize how much is out there. This is just a section of what we think you should know as students, all right? Now we're going to get into the more interesting ones, color and texture. So color is more abstract. It's a little harder to describe color, but there's some words that are better than others. Some words are more correct. If you describe an oboe a certain way, as a very open and beautiful sound, maybe that's not as correct because the oboe sound is very closed. It's very nasal, like this. And so the words we pick, it might be interpretive, but the way that we use them, some are better than others. Now, we also use the word timbre. All right, timbre and color are interchangeable, but timbre is the way that we define the sound of an instrument, right? How much time do we have? Let's not spend too much time on it. But basically, if you go into the science of why an instrument sounds a certain way, it's because of the way the overtones interact with each other. An oboe and a flute both play the same A, but they sound different. Why is that? Well, it's because they have different timbres. A flute is made of metal, where an oboe is made of wood. And the way that the sound waves vibrate inside the body of the instrument makes it sound different. Different overtones create different colors. So we can say the flute is bright. No one's going to argue with you that a high flute sounds very bright, right? That's a pretty descriptive term. High violins are vibrant, right? You get the really nice vibrato on a high note, and it's really going to shine out in the concert hall. Trumpets can be very piercing and brassy sounding when called for. No one's going to argue that trumpets can't play loud. All right? And when they play loud, the sound stabs you, right? That's piercing, right? Sound hits you, especially if it's high. It just kind of makes your eardrum feel like something poked it, all right? That's piercing. Brassy sounding, right? Brass have a sound, a particular quality. We call that brassy. When a large string orchestra plays in perfect balance, the sound is full, round, and deep. So it's the same way that when I play a C major chord here, how can we describe this? It's balanced, yes. We're trying to describe the color of the sound. How can we describe the color of the sound? So bright is very good. Major chords typically have a bright sound. Now my piano teacher would argue that C sharp major and G flat would have a different kind of bright. Still major, but not as bright, right? Different color. So what else? We have one word so far. Clear. It's clear, yes. It's clear. Deep. Okay. Like reading poetry on the riverbed, right? Yes, deep. Now, let me play a different C major chord. How is that one different? Still C major. Rich. Definitely more rich. Simple. More complex, right? More rich. More overtones, because now I have a lower note, right? And the lower note's creating more of these strings up here vibrate, so I'm getting more colors, right? And if you get into the science of it, you can really learn some interesting things. So just even describing a C major chord, right? There's ways that we can differentiate between the sound of one C major chord or another. Or if you have the strings playing a C major chord versus the woodwinds playing a C major chord. Different ways of describing the color. So I like to say when all of the strings are playing perfectly in tune, it makes the whole room you're in vibrate in a special way. That's round, deep, full. All right? Yeah, sound. A lot of times when we play pizzicato, I say this to my strings all the time. If you just play pizzicato, it'll go boom. And the sound just goes, right? That's not round. So I say, add a little vibrato, right? And then the string will continue to vibrate after you pluck it. And so instead of going boom, it's more boom, right? And that changes the sound, changes the color. And as a conductor, you learn little tricks like that to try and get a better quality of sound out of your orchestra by how they play certain notes. All right? Any questions about color? Now, we're not talking about blue or yellow or green, right? But we can still use actual colors to describe music, but it's better to use some descriptive terminology. All right, any questions?
Okay.
Yes?
Is a sound full, round, or deep can always be called rich?
Rich. So rich, to me, now of course this is interpretive, so people can have different opinions about this, but rich to me means lots of overtones. The more overtones you can hear in a particular sound, the more rich it will be. Also part of the chord. If you have, for example, like a E flat minor chord, right? That's got a nice rich sound, but if I add a ninth to it, it adds a different layer. It's a little more rich because I have this, right? So I have this play between these two notes, and it's creating different overtones that are mixing together and creating a different richness in the sound. So, right? All very rich harmony. I could do the same thing without the ninth. It's more simple. It's less rich, more clear. But then I add the ninth. Right? Changes. It changes the color. And we're not using that ninth in a melodic way or anything. So if you weren't looking at the music, you maybe you couldn't tell it was there. But the way it changed the color of the harmony made it more rich in that way. Did that answer your question? Okay, all right. Anything else? Any more questions? I like questions. All right, let's move on. So now we can kind of our last thing today, and then we'll do some examples and see if we have transformed our thinking by going through this and if we can apply it to some music. So texture. Now, how can we describe texture? How is texture different from color? Any thoughts?
I think texture is more cubic.
Cubic? Okay. If we're talking about art, visual art, then you certainly can think about it that way. Texture, I think you could. If you visualize music in a certain way, in this style, you could say cubic. But there's, I think, better words, better ways to describe texture.
Texture is about the structure of the music, how composers put different pictures together, how they use the harmony. And the timbre is something what we hear and how the music sounds.
Okay, yeah. So I would say, the harmony and the timbre are going to go along with how we describe the color, right? Texture is more about how we are putting the sound on top of itself, how we are layering the sound. So I say texture, like color, is also more abstract, but describes the different ways of layering sound. Layering sound. So we have kind of 3 or 4 main texture words that you will learn, or you have already hopefully learned, by saying 3 different types of texture. Anybody know what they are? Don't tell the answer. Let them answer. So the 3 basic ones that you learn in undergrad music history. Polyphonic. Polyphony, yes. That's one. What's the others? Harmonic, not harmonic. Harmonic just means sounds good together, right? We have polyphonic. Monophonic. Monophonic meaning one line, only one layer. Polyphonic, many layers that are moving differently. And the last one, the most common one. Thank you, homophonic, homophonic. Most of the music that we listen to now, classical music on, is homophonic, right? So, monophonic, one line, one layer. Polyphonic, multiple different lines interacting together. Think about Bach. Think about Renaissance polyphony. where we have one person singing and then another person sings the same line a little later, imitative. And we have homophonic. Large groups and sections work in a similar way to support the melody. We can sometimes call it accompaniment and melody, but basically homo means the same, right? Homo means the same. So homophonic, same sound. Phonic meaning sound. So monophonic, one sound. Polyphonic, poly meaning many. Phonic, sounds, many sounds. Homophonic, similar sounds together. All right. Now, as you progress, then you can, there's some others. There's what we call heterophonic, where we can have homophonic groups working in a polyphonic way with each other. When we think about Stravinsky, a lot of times he will have groups playing together in a homophonic way, but those lines are interacting with other groups that are mixing together. So we have two together. We call that heterophonic, but it's not so common. All right? Now, texture also describes how the music is arranged, right? The layer. So common texture words are thick. Is the melody thick? Do I have many instruments playing it together? Or just one? Thin, solo. You can have solo texture. What's the difference between solo and soli? No, it means different things. I think solo actually is Italian. It's many people playing the solo together, right? Right, so a lot of times in a string orchestra, it'll say violin 1 soli, right? Meaning that all of the first violin are playing the important line, the solo line, right? Tutti, what does tutti mean? Everybody, right? So we can often describe form by saying I have a solo section and a tutti section. Or I have a soli section in the violins and then a tutti section where everyone is playing together. It helps us break apart the structure of the music, which is why we consider form and texture kind of interlinked. But form also does exist by its own. It describes the overall movement, but also stand alone as an important musical element. So binary, meaning two forms, A, B, rondo, A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, A, F, A, G. Repeating forever. Sonata allegro, fugal form, and there's many, many types of forms, all right? Any questions about texture? Yeah?
Is the binary or rondo is about texture or the form?
So these are specifically types of form, but because they describe the overall movement of the music, you can use it as a way of describing the texture. Because you can say that my texture is I have an A section, and then I have something contrasting. Contrasting texture. Contrasting means what? Conflict, something different, right? A usually, and we can use Sonata Allegro as the example, right? The A theme in Sonata Allegro is usually what? Fast and energetic. 10 points for you, all right? The A section is fast and energetic, and the B section is not necessarily slow. We're not changing the rhythm, but we are changing the texture, right? The A section is usually fast and energetic, many people playing together, big, long sections of building energy, and then we usually have the bum, 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 a big half cadence, and then we have a rest, and then we have a new theme. One instrument playing something. This is how we can describe texture, because we go from an A high energy idea, and then we have what's called the medial caesura. That's a complex term, but when we analyze it, it exists in almost everything. And then we have this opening of the B theme, right? It's a contrasting idea, right? They're different because composers wanted that contrast. They wanted that story, all right? And then fugal, of course, how we do the subjects and everything like that. Any questions so far? Oh, camera guy was raising his hand. I thought he had a question. Anybody else? So now we've really kind of concluded the word. I've been throwing a lot of words at you. Now, of course, I didn't expect you to remember them all, but now I want you to think, how can we apply, describe, analyze, interpret to some music? Now let's try to put it in practice. We had an opening listening example, and almost all of us interpreted the music. Now let's challenge ourselves. Can we take that and flip it? Can we describe it and then analyze it and then interpret it? So do not try to analyze it first. Do not try to interpret it. Describe what you hear. KISS. Keep it simple. Students, keep it simple. Silly. All right? Yeah, stupid is not such a nice word, so we say keep it simple, silly. All right? So here's the first example. It's a short little piano piece, something a little more less complex. So let's take a listen. So this piece actually has a little story behind it, but maybe I'll save that for after. Do you guys want to listen to it one more time? Let's listen to it one more time, right? Think about how you can describe this. Okay, so let's try to break it down. Let's not try to go too much. Let's start with melody. Okay, how can we describe the melody? Dramatic. Is that a description, an analyzation, or an interpretation? That's an interpretation, right? Say it again. Leaping. 10 points for you. Leaping. That is a very descriptive term. What else?
I think the melody goes up at first and then goes down in a very lively way.
Okay, so lively goes up and down. Now, we can talk about how it goes up and down. We can separate that into two different kind of things. And I'll kind of save my analysis of it for the end. So let's keep going, right? But I definitely can understand that. What else? So remember our simple words. Short, long, fast, slow, high, low. Fast or slow? Dee da da da, dee da 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 dee da. Everyone shouted fast so fast, but da 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 da, dee da 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 dee. I don't think it's so fast.
About 80 for 1 minute.
Okay. Now, we're starting with melody, right? So when we get to rhythm, then we can try and say how fast or slow, right? But that's also kind of an analysis. Well, I don't know. We can have different levels of how deep we want to go. But I think leaping was a very good word, right? I did like the high or low, how you described it. Now, what about these? I don't think I'm going to play it 100% correctly, but it's, how do you call that? Hammered? No, I wouldn't say hammered.
Ending and ends very abruptly.
Okay, so now, fast or slow? Fast, right? Up or down? Up. Scalar or chromatic? Chromatic. Right? Very chromatic. Very chromatic. I'm using all 12 pitches. Right? And later on in the piece, he actually does this. He goes, he does it for a really long time, and my fingers get really tired. All right? So, that's how we can describe it. That's how we can describe the melody. It goes up, it's highly chromatic, it's very fast. So we have two different ideas, and we have to specify which one we're talking about, right? Because if we get too specific, then we don't know where we are. In the beginning, I have this leaping melody, right? Then it gets interrupted by this vertical, right? Chromatic, upward, fast interruption. I don't even know if I'd call it a melody. I just say an interruption, right? Then it comes back. The melody comes back. Same or different? Different. How is it different? It's an octave higher, right? It's an octave higher. First time, it's kind of a high pitch, but then it becomes even higher, right? Then, at the very end, again, we have this, and it goes down, and it goes up, and it goes high, and then it goes low, right? So, you can get very specific as you're describing the melody. Now, how can we then take that to the next level? How can we analyze that? Now we're equipped with a lot of knowledge. Now we have a lot of ways of describing it. How do we take it to the next level? How can we analyze it? So I'll give you a little help. It's C, then an octave down, F, G, right? Do, do, fa, so. And then it goes. So how could we analyze that melody? F? Is it F major? In order for it to be major, we would need some kind of third. Do we ever have this interval? No. We do have this one, though. So I actually have all the pitches of C major, right? But I'm adding a fourth, right? Sometimes we call that a suspended chord, right? Yes?
It can be described as F Lydian mode.
Yes, it could, right? But when we have modes, we need enough information. So in Lydian, we need to have, right? We don't have that Lydian tone that kind of makes it special to Lydian, right?
I heard it later.
Okay. But for the most part, it only uses C, F, G, C, E, right? So it's very hard to describe a mode, because modes you kind of need all 8 pitches. So you might be able to make an argument for that. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you have to be careful because there's different ways to how you want to approach it. Anything else? Now we've described it, we've analyzed it. How can we interpret this? Now you can say that it's dramatic. Now you can say it's dramatic. It's dramatic because I have these open leaps with these dramatic interruptions. Now you can explain why it's dramatic. What else?
It's not boring.
It's not boring. Okay. Yes? Modern. So if we were to try and put a style period on it, yes, it's modern. That would kind of technically fall in our analysis, right? We're kind of trying to put a... So interpretive, what's the question we ask ourselves? How do I feel, right? So how do I feel? Modern style. Well, that doesn't really work. So how do I feel? Dramatic? Yes, very much so. Anything else?
Intense.
Intense? Did anybody have a picture in their head?
Busy.
Busy. A fat cat?
Yeah, Tom and Jerry.
Yes, Tom and Jerry. This is great. These are interpretations, all right? These are I'm going to save my interpretation for the end because I know the composer of this piece. It's not me. I wish it was. But, and I'll tell you what he was thinking of when he wrote this. But let's go through the other steps. Now, we have melody. What about harmony? How can we describe the harmony? No, let's do rhythm first. How can we describe the rhythm? So, yeah, start first. Symmetrical or asymmetrical? Symmetrical. All right. What else? We know it's symmetrical because we have this. Right? And then we have irregular accents. All right? Irregular accents. The composer is accenting different parts of the beat to make it rhythmically interesting. All right? He could have written it like this. Right? That's boring. So we change the accents to make it more interesting. All right? What else about the rhythm? Fast or slow? Bum 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 bum. Not fast, right? It's not fast. It's quite slow. It's quite slow. But we're talking about the beat, right? Now, the notes above the beat, that we can describe in different ways. But that maybe doesn't apply so much to the rhythm as much as the melody or the texture or the color or with the different things the composer is trying to create. Anything else with rhythm? Does it speed up or slow down? No, it always stays the same. How can we describe something that stays the same? Steady. Steady. Right. Static. Yes, you could say static. Right? So, we have a steady rhythm with irregular accents in the melody. That's not too fast. Not too fast. All right? Okay, harmony. How can we describe the harmony? Now, we had our Lydian, right? That's one way that we could think of the harmony. Is the harmony open or closed? Open, right? Now, a lot of it's within one octave. Right? This is still close. But when we think about the intervals, a fourth, a second, and then a fourth. Or we can think about it a fifth and a fourth and a second. Those are still quite open intervals. So there's an argument for both. But then later, he adds this. So now we have, this is our final chord, right? And then we have in the left hand, then later we add this. Still part of our C, F, G, C, E. So this is our harmony. Say it again. I couldn't hear you. Say it one more time. Successful. You could say successive or repetitive maybe is a better word, right? It's a harmony that repeats over and over again. We can also say that the harmony is this is again, static. It doesn't really change. But then we get these interruptions. How can we describe these interruptions? Now, we already applied this term to melody, but it applies to harmony as well. Chromatic, right? Chromatic. So we have a chromatic fast interruption that's interrupting this kind of, 5-tone chord. All right? So last two. So how can we, so we've analyzed it. Now how can we interpret the harmony? How does the harmony make us feel? Bright, yes, it's certainly bright. Especially when, and this is a compositional technique, if you have a chord and you do it all in fifths, and then you put the third on the top, it makes the chord very bright, right? And you'll see a lot of compositions where if they want a very bright ending, they will have all fifths, and then they'll have a third on the top. So they'll only give the third to one instrument, like the flutes. And that creates a very bright orchestration. We call that orchestration, right? The way we orchestrate something. Okay? So how does the harmony make us feel? Do we have any ways we can describe the feeling of the harmony? Now we can start with the basics. Is it happy or sad? We have a happy. I think generally, overall, it's quite happy. Now we get these interruptions and they kind of change our feeling, right? So maybe in some ways it's a little scary, right? That's of course a feeling, but I have this happy feeling and then all of a sudden I have this interruption. Something scares me, right? So let's move on now to color and texture. So color, we're talking about the piano. So anytime we talk about the color, we're talking about how we're moving the notes across the spectrum of the piano. So of course the higher we play, the brighter the sound, the thinner the sound, the lower, the thicker, the fuller. How can we describe the texture of what we heard? A lot of the terms we've used already. Remember, we can apply more than one idea, more than one term to the same concept. We heard the melody and the harmony is quite open. The texture is an open texture. You can apply the same thing, all right? The color is bright. The color is an open color. It's not so rich, but in the chromatic section, it can be very conflicting, can be rich, but not in the rich is the same way as a whole chord. Overtones rich, but rich in lots of notes, lots of chromatic pitches. So let me give you a little insight into this piece. So this piece was composed by Jackson Berkey, who is a famous composer in America, American pianist, and he wrote a piece called The Atlantic Sweet Fantasy. And he lived on the Atlantic coast. He loved going to the beach, and he loved watching the waves come in and out. And so this particular piece is called Geoffrey Piper. Piper is a type of bird, a piper bird, right? And so the vision I get in my head, now of course I know the title, so that influences my thinking, but imagine a bird walking on the beach, looking for food. Dee da da da, dee da da da, dee da da da, dee da 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 da. Maybe another bird shows up. Now we have two lines. Da 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 da, da dee da da da. Then what happens? The water comes in. Dee da da. Now, but he's a little more cautious, right? Dee da da da. Dee, da, 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 dee. And then a big wave comes. Boom, he flies away. Right? Now, of course, if you didn't know the title, you could have created whatever interpretive story you wanted. All right? But the way that we can visualize the music is the way we can think about how we describe it. Now, I do want to jump a little bit because one technique that I like to use, and I use this in my classes a lot, is I like to draw. I like to draw the sound. Because sometimes there's so many things going on, it's hard to visualize. So sometimes you listen to it once and you draw the melody. And you pick a color. And then if there's a different melody, maybe use a different color. And then second time you listen to the harmony. Maybe I hear chords or block chords, so I have squares. Right? It's kind of cubic. Sometimes I can have other shapes. Or I can have something that goes up. So I like to draw. And I actually have an example of my drawing for this piece. So I'm going to skip ahead just a little. All right? So ignore the second example. All right? Here is my drawing for this particular example. right? So here's the final drawing. Now it's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be, right? Because you just do it as you go. And so I remember, now I know this song quite well, or this piece quite well, so I could just sing it to myself as I did it. So I had one note, right? But then later it becomes two. So I have thicker texture here, right? And then I have a winding melody. And then later it gets higher. Now I went a little lower. Of course, it's not perfect. I'm not Picasso, all right? But it still shows the difference. And then I have this interruption. Then it comes in higher the second time. But still, up and down, showing those leaps. I'm showing that winding up and down melody. Then, again, goes down. Now I drew it going back up, but I was just doing it real fast, right? And then I have some more of the melody for a small second. And then I have some short, boom, boom, the F and the G, slowly going up the piano. Then a big, long interruption, and then boom, right? And I picked red, because that's a red sound to me, all right? But this is, now, with this picture, we can really describe what we listen to. It makes it much easier to think about how the music visually can connect. And then it's much easier to connect words with it. So I would suggest, if you're just starting out in this active listening, and you have a hard time visualizing it in your head, do it on paper. Get some colored pencils, start with a very small section, 50 seconds, 60 seconds, and then draw it. And you'll be surprised at what new things that you're hearing in the music that you didn't hear before, because now you can visualize what's going on. All right? Any questions about my masterpiece here? All right. Now, I think, you have a question? Yeah?
Why there are too many zigzags in your melody line?
So, yeah, sometimes I was just, because in my head, I just heard lots of notes. And so maybe at that particular time, I couldn't hear if they were going up or down. I just heard lots of notes, so I just drew a bunch of lines, right? So it's not a perfect system. You know, if you really wanted to be very deliberate about your drawing, then you could. But yeah, in this particular example, you know, I just thought it's a lot of notes, and I just wanted to represent that in my line. All right? Any other questions? If you want the original, it's only $5 million, all right? Anything else? Any questions about this? So I do have one more example, and I'll play it, and we'll do a fast version of it, because I want to save some maybe 10 or 15 minutes for if any questions you may have, all right? So I'm just going to go back just a little, and we can listen to the second example, all right? And you should all know this one, all right? All right, so let's do like a bullet round, right? Fast round. So melody. How can we describe the melody? Describe. Don't analyze. Don't interpret. Describe.
Slow.
Slow. Okay.
Comfortable.
Comfortable. Yeah, that would be an interpretation. Smooth.
No.
That one's kind of, yeah, it's got some gray area in there.
Overarching.
Overarching. Yeah, it does. It's a very long phrase. You could say that. A long phrase. What else? High or low? Now, it's high because it's in the violin. But what part of the violin is it in? It's in the low part of the violin, right? It has it. If we're relative to the violin, the melody is quite low. right? Relative to the violin. Overall, it's high, yes, but that is important to the color and the texture, right? Because playing a melody on the G string on a violin is going to sound a lot different if you play it on the E string, right? What else? Anything else? Now, let's just do we'll do our interpretations at the end. So, melody, rhythm. How can we describe the rhythm? Slow. Is it duple, triple, or quadruple? So we all have to get out our conducting skills here. Da dee da da dee da dee dum da 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 dee. Could be that. Da dee da 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 dum da da. Nope, not that. Da 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 dee. Oh, sorry. Da 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 dee. Da da dee da 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 da. Okay, sorry, I'm not an expert, but duple, triple, quadruple. I think the strongest argument is for quadruple because we have one strong downbeat, then we have a weaker strong, and then it comes up. So it's most likely in 4. I don't remember when I looked at the score and studied this piece. All right, harmony. Now, I've studied this piece quite a lot. It's really interesting how they use the harmony, students at the conservatory here, when they wrote this piece, right? So they took traditional harmony, and then they substituted thirds, and then they used fourths and seconds instead. So you actually don't ever have full triadic harmony. You have a lot of this kind of harmony, right? They replace the third with the fourth or with the second, right? And that is why we get this kind of traditional Chinese feel to it at the same time, because we're taking out that third element. They still have thirds in it, but the overall color and texture of the harmony has that feel that we remove these kinds of intervals. All right? And they did that on purpose. They had a specific purpose for that. All right? Anything else for the harmony? Okay, what about the color? Red. Okay.
Orange to me.
Orange. All right. I have a drawing for this one too, don't worry. I did not use orange though. Now, so now we have color and texture. What instruments are playing? Think about it that way. So the violin. The what? Cello. Bass. So the strings are doing a technique. What technique are they using? Pizzicato, right? So we have a pizzicato texture in the bottom, right? We have the solo violin, and then we have some other instruments. Woodwinds. Which woodwinds? Flute and? Oboe. Flute and oboe are doing this, right? They're meandering. And then sometimes we have the oboe come in with a counter melody, right? And sometimes the clarinet comes in with a counter melody. Here's my picture. It's yellow, but it looks orange on the, all right? So I have the opening, the oboe and the flute together, doing this winding melody. And then here, dum, boom, 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 right? The pizzicato notes, they sweep up. And they start low and they go up. And they go low and up. And they go and low up. And then they go down, deep, up, 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 right? That's one way you can describe. Then we have the violin melody in green. Then we have a flute counter melody above. Notice the trills. All right, sorry, I'm not singing it right. Then we have the melody again, but the accompaniment is different this time. It's not pizzicato. Now they're bowing, they're arco, they're playing chords. So I saw this as a more full sound, right? Moving down and up, and then we end the same way we begin. All right? Anybody have any questions about this? Right? I think drawing is very useful very useful because it helps us visualize what we hear. And then the more we practice it, we can start doing it in our head. We can start doing it in our head. All right? So let's go ahead and open up. We have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to you guys. If you have any questions, now is your time to ask. Question, answer, Q&A. Yeah, so if you have questions, I will try to answer them. My favorite color is orange. I have a dog named Pom Pom, all right? No, he's not, but he's, yeah.
I was wondering what's the difference between horizontal and vertical and harmony and melody?
So horizontal is going to be harmony that planes, right? That uses all the pitches of a scale, but doesn't use them in a progressive way. So you're not going to have one chords going to 4 chords or 2 chords going to 5 chords. Horizontal melody is melody that either doesn't change, so you have one harmony that stays the same, right? And then it keeps moving. Think Philip Glass, right? Or you have harmony that only uses the same notes but not in a progressive way, not in a going back to tonic kind of way. When you're talking about vertical melody or vertical harmony, you're thinking about harmony that moves, right, in this jumping way. I view this chord as vertical, right? Because C major and F sharp major are as far away from each other as they can get on the circle of fifths. So I see that as a vertical harmony just by the way that they are arranged, right? Now you might have a different view on that. You could also think of how the harmony is moving. Maybe the harmony is shooting up in a chromatic way. That can be vertical. You go da, da, dee, da, 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 right? That could be an example of vertical harmony, all right? Sometimes there are better words to describe it, but sometimes you hear this. And to me, when I hear this, I say vertical. That's vertical harmony. Good question. Shaiga. Yeah?
Are there any scientific relationship between the harmonic series and the chords we used to?
Yes, but that's a long question to answer, all right? We use equal temperament. Equal temperament is a tempered system. So when we take the harmonic series, we can't tune an instrument directly to the harmonic series. It just doesn't work. If you tune an instrument to fifths, then thirds and sixths are out of tune. If you tune it to thirds and sixths, then fifths and octaves become out of tune, right? So the way it's a complex question to answer, but the reason that we use equal temperament is because it was the best compromise we could find that allowed us to play in all 12 keys. So we slightly we make some notes a little flat, and then over the entire span of the keyboard, it sounds okay. But in reality, a major third is actually 34 cents sharp from what a harmonic or a, how would you say, natural third would be. A third occurring in nature is actually much more flat. And we could do an experiment where we could have people sing kind of a do and then a mi, and you will find that our ear naturally pushes us flat, but the piano is actually quite sharp. So that's why tuning certain instruments with the piano is very difficult, right? Because the piano is out of tune. But we make it out of tune on purpose, all right? But that's a long, hard question to answer. The science, right? The science behind it. The square root of 2, the 12th square root of 2 is the scientific answer. Okay? Yep.
How to describe the melody if it jumps a lot?
So we use the word jumps a lot here. Anybody remember what word we used? Leaping. Also, angular, right? Angular melodies, right? Bartok, it's very angular. Bartok's very angular. I love Bartok. Very angular. What else? Anything else? You're looking at me like you have a question? No? So, well, I guess we can go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you guys very much. I know 2 hours is a long time, so I appreciate you sticking through it. Now, a little bit about the next. Do you want me to kind of introduce the next topic? Talk about the next. What's that? So, next lecture is I want to invite some musicians to come and play for us. And then we can actually apply these concepts to live music. How we can describe, analyze, interpret it. How we can apply that to a style. So I hope we can find some willing participants. That would be a lot of fun.
My concluding question. So, for example, when you try to say, you describe it from rhythm and melody and harmony and everything, and say, when we really describe one piece of example, it's kind of confusing to us because we have so many things. So when you describe, do you try to usually find the dominant things that come to you? Or do you try to always use at least 3 or 4 of the elements when you describe?
So when I'm thinking about music, I break it down to one thing at a time. I mean, really, our brain can only handle so much information at once. And if you're really actively listening, then you should try and focus on smaller concepts. You do get better with time at hearing how things are interacting together. So you can do 2 or 3 concepts at the same time, or you can quickly in your mind jump between listening to melody, listening to harmony, listening to rhythm. But it's really difficult to have all those go together at the same time. So it's best to start simple. Start with just the melody, try and describe it, and then add all the elements. You know, the first example took us, we spent 20 minutes just describing 48 seconds worth of music. So you can spend as little or as long time as you want. It's really how you break it down and what works best for you.
And that's your homework.
All right, thank you all very much. I appreciate it.